Yeah, sure. Thank you for the opportunity from industry. I've been at the table since the beginning, more listening and otherwise, but we appreciate the opportunity to be here. Aaron Cole is our farm manager, is here to my left, and who did most of the work, Carly and others here, and what we do. And a lot of what was covered with the results of what we've gotten in our assistance on the collaborative part of the study in terms of what we've done on genetic side and brood selection. So really a lot of the value I can add is the why. You know, we've raised fish now for 5+ years, the pompano, and so started with wild brood, and that's really up until recently what we've continually spawned. We've done now about 45, 50 cohorts of different spawns and runs, growing them out through duration. So learned quite a bit, but also learned where the opportunities were from working with wild brood exclusively, right? So we in nature just have a higher CV or variance that comes from those wild populations, and what we've seen in cohorts, something that's enticing to reduce, if possible, from selective breeding, right? We've seen in those results just more labor, more time, trying to get a consistency. As most know, we're fortunate with pompano in that there's not a high or any cannibalism or so forth, but they do compete. So those 50-gram fish swimming with their 20-gram siblings tend to outcompete, and that CV only gets worse, right? So we've handled that. Make a long story short, through a lot of grading. You know, we do 3 or 4 major gradings in their life cycle, and that's significant for a 10-month, grow out species. It's a lot of work, and at our scale, very manual process. So selective breeding has always been on the cusp. We just were never prepared internally to take it on, whether it was cost, timing, of all the variables we had to work on the grow out. This started to rear its head a couple years ago, and obviously the work and skill set was here, and budget was here in that study. And so what we provided was very basic, right? The data. We said through all those cohorts, if we do nothing else, we do a lot of runs. We have a lot of eggs. We have a lot of juveniles going through the system. So we were able to take those fin clips, whether they're larval, we'd give whole fish samples. Back to HBOI, if it was a larger fish, we do clips and measure that in various components of this life stage, right? That started from larval, from a few days old, all the way up to grow out specimens, and just prior to harvest, taking that. We looked at several varieties during that cohort. We do our what are called bottom call during each of those grades. So we'll take those clips, which be just as much valuable information to get genetically as those top performers, right? We also want to take those fish out that were, like I said, 100 grams where their counterparts are 50. So what outliers were there? So Paul's direction and others, we kind of looked and took a measured result of what we wanted to take each month while we were sampling, giving that data back, and so forth. So that went well. It was very consistent, in terms of what we had to do in transferring that data back to HBOI. Again, the unique characteristics, we had some courses during that time. There are some anomalies, right? Like we don't know if it's genetic, we don't know if it's environmental, diet. Pompano is, as much as you think they all look alike, very different. So we'd have some head size variances they took genetic work on. We had some skin coloration, almost chromosation type of look at some of our offspring. And so we took a look at that to see if there were genetic triggers. So just a few characteristics outside of just growth, but all that data was, again, we're the great regurgitator and collector of data and brought in. Going forward, some of the interesting work to go forward with is we talked about years ago, and now making a priority is, when do these fish reach sexual maturity, and where does that impact growth and so forth. Aaron and I laughed, but up until recent, we could sit on a 5,000 fish swimming in one of our grow out tanks, and they all could be female or male, and we wouldn't know the difference. We kind of have our inklings, but we don't have the resource to really predict. We are very curious early on in development when we do that first grading at half a gram, are we selecting out most of the males out of that or not? We don't know, right? And so as we get into broodstock development and so forth, it'll not behoove us to get rid of all of our males in that grading process. It's nice to keep a few in, but until we can understand when those gonads develop and so forth, it's really secondary, right? So that's some of the work now. going on and assisting with is some of that when do these gonads develop in Florida Pompano? When can you start to see those and how can you easily test? More importantly, we don't want to kill all those top performers we want to keep. We want to be able to be able to detect before we detect spawning, size fish and so forth. So again, between fin clips, looking at GSI, looking at other things, I think there's overpopulous of information and data, but that has been our MO, and we appreciate the opportunity. I could say this and take my selfish 2 seconds. We've been on a lot of grants with a lot of research and universities and nonprofits, and I truly, this is the first a couple of years I consider us a true collaborator, meaning we're contributing to the work being done versus just producing eggs, which we've done as well, or fingerlings to the project. We're always happy to do that, but I take that's where it diversifies from being a vendor selling eggs or selling juveniles and turning into a collaborator where you're working on this information. And so I don't take it for heart because it's I'd say too rare. It should be more popular, but I just say it's a good turn of direction in becoming a collaborator versus a vendor, if you will, during these projects. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.